Okay.
Good morning, good afternoon,
good evening, ladies and gentlemen. As the chair of Atlas, I would like to extend a warm welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us in this webinar, which is the official launch of the Atlas Special Interest Group Orphanage Tourism. We're very glad that this special interest group has taken shape, and today marks its official beginning. It's organized by Rodney Westerlaken, the coordinator of this newly established special interest group. As many of you may already know, Atlas, which is the Association for Tourism and Leisure Education, is an organization dedicated to advancing research, education, and collaboration in the fields of tourism, leisure, and hospitality. And the goal of Atlas is to foster academic excellence by promoting research, teaching, and knowledge exchange in the fields as mentioned before. Today's webinar is centered on the critical issue of orphanage tourism, an area that sits at the crossroads of tourism, child protection, and international development. And this discussion is particularly relevant in the broader context of volunteer tourism, as it raises important considerations that require our attention. Through this session, we aim to contribute to more responsible and sustainable tourism practices. So on behalf of Atlas, I hope that this webinar provides you with valuable insights and new knowledge to take away. Thank you once again for your participation and engagement. And with that, I'm pleased to hand over to Rodney Westerlaken, the coordinator of this new special interest group. And please, Rodney, over to you.
Thank you so much, Corné. So welcome to this special interest group. It's a joy to present today and to open this group because I think it's really important to have collaboration all together, to see what one is researching and how this fits into practice and what research or how research can actually affect practice. So I'm really happy to be able to present today and to launch this webinar. And with that, create that space where we can interact and where we can make sure that where we see possibilities can also collaborate. So my name is Rodney Westerlaken. I'm today here as the coordinator of the Special Interest Group. And in my daily job, I work for NHL Stenning University of Applied Science in the Netherlands, though coming from Bali at the moment, where I live with my family. And where we are also running Westerlaken Foundation, or as it's locally known, Yayasan Westerlaken Alliance Indonesia. And within the foundation, we have a program in which we actually implement the recommendations of my own PhD research, which was focusing on the problem of orphanage tourism, and how the world of tourism is shaping that world of orphanages. So we're having three guest main speakers today. So I'm very happy that those three individuals have taken the opportunity to be here in the lounge. So we have Professor Dr. Jozef Schier, who has a pre-recorded message for us. Then we have Patricia Nieuwenhuizen from the Netherlands, from, among others, Better Care Network. And Patricia is able to show us how research goes into practice and what kind of campaigns are being undertaken at the moment. And we have Manika Santi, who is the program coordinator or program manager actually of Westerlaken Foundation. So she will make a nice bridge in what is legislation within Indonesia and how did research shape the program that we're working on. So as I said before, the first lecture or part of this webinar is by Professor Dr. Jozef Schier. He's a professor of sustainable tourism and heritage and the Associate Dean International of the School of Social Sciences in Western Sydney University, and also the editor of the book Modern Day Slavery and Orphanage Tourism. And that's a really great book to get into that world and see legislation and see how the worlds of modern slavery and orphanage tourism are intertwined. So I've been working a lot with the work of Joseph, and last January I was able to meet him on the Atlas conference in Haitao in China, and immediately we connected. So I asked Joseph to provide a lecture today. Unfortunately, Joseph is in India at the moment, but he was very keen on giving a keynote here, which is pre-recorded. So unfortunately, we cannot ask him questions in the Q&A after, but I'm sure his contribution will be very helpful in shaping what we're talking about today. There we go.
Hello, everyone. I'm sorry I'm unable to join you in person today for this very important and timely symposium. I thank Dr. Rodney Westerlaken for inviting me to present at this. I'm currently in India, and at the time the conference will actually be running, I will be traveling. So unfortunately, the best I can do is provide to you a recorded presentation. So let me share my screen in the first instance so that we can get started with this. So as I said earlier, my name is Joseph Chia. I'm based at Western Sydney University, where I'm a professor of sustainable tourism and heritage. I'm also the co-editor of the journal Tourism Geographies as well. Rodney asked me to talk about the current trends and challenges in orphanage tourism and research. And over the next 15 minutes or so, that's what I will do. Congratulations also on the launching of the Atlas Special Interest Group on Orphanage Tourism. I think it's an overdue initiative, and I congratulate you, Rodney, and Atlas for bringing this to the fore. So by way of introduction, I always like to start when we talk about things related to children and their welfare, and especially in this case, orphanage tourism, the United Nations Conventions on the Rights of the Child. I think this is a good kind of a reference point for us when we're talking about the rights of children. As the convention states, it was open for signature, ratification, and accession by the General Assembly on the 20th of November 1989. So that's nearly 35 years ago now, and it continues to be a reference point for discussions like we are having today. Just to pick out some key points that I think resonate for me when we talk about orphanage tourism in the convention are these three. First one, recalling that in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the United Nations has proclaimed that childhood is entitled to special care and assistance. Second, convinced that the family as the fundamental group of society and the natural environment for the growth and well-being of all its members, and particularly children, should be afforded the necessary protection and assistance so that it can fully assume its responsibilities within the community. And the third, recognizing that the child, for the full and harmonious development of his or her personality, should grow up in a family environment, in an atmosphere of happiness, love, and understanding. And these three passages out of the Declaration, to my mind, resonate when it comes to discussions about the merits or not of orphanage tourism. Just by way of context and my involvement in this stream of research, my work in sustainable tourism and tourism geographies research is quite diverse, and this represents one of the streams. In 2017, with Lee Matthews from Alto Consulting and Rethink Orphanages, we were working in a joint collaboration with Intrepid Travel, one of the world's largest adventure travel company, who at the time were reflecting on the involvement of orphanage tourism in their itineraries. And so this paper and the conversation came out as a starter to the conversation, and it preceded what was going to become a book project later on. This was the book project, Modern Day Slavery and Orphanage Tourism, where we tried to link two quite disparate concepts in modern day slavery and orphanage tourism to emphasize the way that practices in orphanage tourism and the upshot for children in orphanage tourism in some way can be described as a type of modern day slavery. Of course, many scholars would find this difficult because modern day slavery as a concept seems to be so far and remote from tourism as an idea. However, on closer inspection, we like to argue that modern day slavery practices are somewhat prevalent in orphanage tourism practices. In the book, Paul Ronalds, the chief executive of Save the Children Australia in 2017, says this: for them, Save the Children, institutionalized care in the form of orphanages is never going to be in the best interest of children as required by the Convention, except in rare and time-limited circumstances. This is especially the case where the child has immediate or extended family who could care for them. Their experience in Cambodia was evidence of that. Most fundamentally, reducing institutional care in places like Cambodia must start with an understanding of why so many families are choosing to entrust the care of their children to such facilities. There are complex and multiple drivers underpinning these choices, and that's the key point. To oversimplify solutions towards trying to stem adverse practices in orphanage tourism is difficult. And as Paul Ronald says, it's because of the complex and multiple drivers that underpin the phenomenon. Paul Ronalds also said that the Modern Slavery Act, which was being discussed at the time, around 2017, 2018, by the Australian government, shone the light on tourism supply chains. And it was an important first step forward in highlighting the harm from types of tourism that were under scrutiny, and in this case, orphanage tourism. However, it is only one of a number of changes necessary to achieve the important social change that is required to reduce the institutionalization of children in low and middle income countries. Because, of course, this Modern Day Slavery Act, while enacted in Australia, is problematic in terms of trying to employ the provisions in the Act overseas in another jurisdiction. As Mr. Ronald says, too often schools, faith-based and community groups that facilitate financial support for orphanages have been reticent to take responsibility for their part in encouraging orphanage tourism and unwilling to take an active role in convincing their members to redirect their efforts to far more effective interventions. And this is one of the broader arguments about orphanage tourism. When it comes to orphanage tourism, in the pecking order of who's important, where does the orphan themselves, where do the orphans themselves sit, right? Is it the institutions and the orphanage owners and the faith groups and community groups that facilitate their priorities by using orphanage tourism rather than, and so the interests we are trying to take care of here are less the children, but more all of these other groups that are involved in the phenomenon. As I say in the book as well, it's fair to say that children are vulnerable to the circumstances they find themselves in, and their role as instruments for travel itineraries, while has been for a long time, was becoming a tolerated norm. And at the heart of all of this really is poverty, right? The only reason and the driving reason for orphanage tourism is that many families in the global south, where orphanage tourism is a driving phenomenon, at the heart of their challenges lies poverty, and therein lies the fundamental challenge of our time. Because where poverty is intractable and long-running, tourism can offer children and their families a way out of what are dire predicaments. That must surely be a good thing, you know. Orphanage tourism all bad, orphanage tourism all good. Or orphanage tourism, sometimes good, sometimes not so good, is probably a more apt characterization. On the back of recent evidence-based research concerning activism, legislative action, and critical commentary, integrating children as attractions into the tourism global supply chain has become institutionalized and intensified and fostered, given greater legitimacy than it deserves. How do we describe orphanage tourism? How we define orphanage tourism? We see various definitions popping up, but in our case, we describe orphanage tourism as tourism based on fulfilling traveler desires to do good while traveling in the form of visitations and transference of financial and practical support of orphanages. And as we go on to say, orphanage tourism is largely a global south phenomenon, right? How many developed countries would you find this practice of orphanage tourism? I would argue very little or none at the very most likely. I also say in the book that whether modern slavery is or isn't correctly used terminology in this regard is also a contention, because the connotations of slavery have largely nuanced meanings, harking back to classical slavery as seen during the colonial era. Modern day slavery is more nuanced than that and embraces more contemporary means of depriving someone of their freedoms and human rights. This includes human trafficking, servitude, forced labor, and so on. So this idea of linking modern slavery to orphanage tourism suggests that in some way the children in the orphanages are in some way become vulnerable to modern slavery practices. Over the long term, however, the unnecessary institutionalization of children in for-profit orphanages plays out in adverse long-term outcomes for the most part, with children becoming more prone to dysfunction in their adolescence and adult years. The proneness to marginalization is seen in their inability to become appropriately socialized and having a higher chance of falling into a life of crime or prolonging their association with problematic relationships. Links to the sex industry, precarious labor, and alienation from friends and family are commonplace occurrences for children in institutionalized care, as is the development of unrealistic expectations about their futures. So when children grow up to be adults and they move outside of the institutionalized settings of orphanage tourism, what then becomes of them is a question that not enough researchers have given attention to. So what are some research trends we see? In discussing these research trends, the main thought in my mind is how do we give the research of orphanage tourism increasingly solid theoretical frameworks, and more importantly, how do we move beyond the case study approaches that are so commonplace in much of the orphanage tourism that we see today? And then the other point I will talk about is the necessity for multidisciplinary engagements with the topic. So the first point I will make is regarding emerging multidisciplinarity on the topic of orphanage tourism. We see that orphanage tourism is from our point of view as largely tourism scholars, I'm not going to talk about how tourism scholars have approached orphanage tourism largely, because I think the audience for this today knows that. But what I want to ask and entertain is how do scholars who look at orphanage tourism understand and engage with multidisciplinary approaches to the topic? They might come from geography, international development, international relations, education, psychology, social work, and so on, beyond tourism. And in some ways, I say this because tourism's treatment of orphanage tourism runs the risk of it being seen as just another type of tourism, when it really isn't another type of tourism, as I argue in the book. For example, in this case, in the journal Children's Geographies, for me as a geographer, I find children's geographies as a really good pathway for this discussion. As Amanda Miller and Harriet Beasley say in their paper, it is the idealized Western construction of childhood that suggests children are incapable of active agency in a migration decision to improve their well-being. They also say that the government's policy of orphanage closure and reintegration of children does not consider the cultural transformations associated with the rapid increase in outmigration from rural communities and the implications for returning children. So what they suggest is we need to look much wider than the phenomenon of tourism itself, but at the bookends, at the beginning, before children are transitioned into orphanages, and at the end, as they transition out of orphanages. This is a particularly important treatment of the topic through a children's geographies lens, critical geographies in a sense. At the same time, we see in psychology literature, as in this case, Frimpong Manso talks about the implications for orphanage tourism in Ghana, a case study approach about how funding orphanages on donations and gifts drives the phenomenon. As Frimpong Manso says, the orphanage's current dependence on international donations and volunteer efforts is largely unsustainable. The financial resources coming from donors are rarely guaranteed, while the volunteers' presence in the orphanages is only for short periods. This lack of a steady income source causes financial issues which create poor living conditions and human rights violations for orphans. The overdependence on donations has given donors the power to regulate the programs and operations of many orphanages. And herein lies one of the pressing dilemmas, right? Where does the power source sit when it comes to orphanage tourism? Here, Frimpong Manso argues that too much power is given to donors. Frimpong Manso also said that the lack of effective government support has serious implications for the funding of orphanages and their ability to provide adequate care for orphans. Governments need to find ways to provide reliable funding for the orphanages so they can support the children in their care. For a low-resource country like Ghana, it is unlikely that the government alone can fund orphanages on its own. The orphanages will need private donor support. So we have this tension between the ongoing needing of donor support for the phenomenon to continue, and their creeping authoritarianism over how orphanages are regulated and how programs are delivered is a question. So, and again, we find ourselves in this situation when orphanages are, their livelihoods are based on donations and gifts. The servicing of these customers, if you will, is particularly important to continuing that income stream that they so heavily rely on. Kathy Carpenter, one of the authors in my book, and my edited book, also talks about this questioning of the rights of the child, in a sense. And her case study was on Cambodia's orphan dance shows and how, over time, as narratives changed, this was seen as a negative. Carpenter says, it is somewhat puzzling that perceptions of orphan dance shows reverse so rapidly and so completely. How can something good become so bad? When did this happen? Why did it happen? Who decides whether these shows are good or bad? Orphan dance shows provide a valuable case study for examining how constructions of childhood change and how these constructions spread and have consequences. And this is a particularly important point that Carpenter writes in a number of her publications, how constructions of childhood change and how these constructions are spread and have consequences. The case study of orphan dance shows also provides a lens through which to explore the historically and culturally contingent nature of constructions of childhood and how they articulate with ideology, especially rights discourses and related ideas such as the best interests of the child and dignity. And most importantly, as Kathy Carpenter says, paradoxically, the construction of children as right bearers, which is prevalent among Western aid workers, attributes to children less capacity and more vulnerability than local, more long-standing constructions of childhood. And these cultural constructions are particularly important, as Carpenter points out, because in some cultures, in some countries, putting children to work for the greater good of the family is not an uncommon thing. It's an important livelihood source. Most Western conceptualizations, and this is me paraphrasing Kathy Carpenter, have given children a different a status and have overlooked the importance of more local constructions of childhood and what childhood entails. And I think this is particularly important, the multidisciplinary nature, once again, of Kathy Carpenter's work is found in Asian studies, as opposed to earlier on, we were looking at studies from anthropology and sociology. Similarly, when it comes to children's rights, looking at this through a legal lens, and Rebecca Knepp has done this in a number of her papers, but in this paper in particular, she talks about identifying clientelism in orphanages and puts forward a model. As she says, examining the relationships between stakeholders involved in orphanages, including orphanage directors, recruiters, donors, and the children and their families, specifically for the presence of clientelism, is critical to closing gaps in knowledge regarding factors that contribute toward child institutionalization, particularly in unregulated settings. Knepp goes on to say that current definitional and conceptual conflicts in clientelism literature hampers the application of clientelism theory to the relational ecosystem of orphanages for classification purposes and for the more critical work of analyzing the range of legal policy and practical ramifications. And what Knepp demonstrates is that there are multiple and appropriate frameworks, analytical frameworks for looking at orphanage tourism. And in this case, drawing from clientelism literature and the clientelism theory helps kind of create pathways for understanding some of the key drivers for orphanage tourism. This is the model that Knepp's put forward, a conceptual model for identifying clientelism in news sites. And we look here at the drivers, the macro socio-cultural attributes that are conducive to clientelism and the macro political attributes that are conducive to clientelism. And together, these bump and grind and sit awkwardly alongside each other. On the right, we see a list of macro political attributes, and on the left, we see a list of macro socio-cultural attributes. And together, orphanage tourism creates these economic attributes that, on the face of it, are designed around giving children and their families a source of livelihoods diversification. And this idea of clientelism that Knepp critiques is a really important application of being able to look at orphanage tourism through a very, very critical and theoretical lens. Lastly, in children's geographies, once again, Upton and Hartung talk about the counter-narratives of care in a Thai orphanage, once again, another case study, they say that in light of the declarations to end orphanage care, we join research that advocates for a more strategic discussion about what is driving the need for orphanages, rather than knee-jerk reactions and simplistic explanations to summarize their sentiments. Upton and Hartung also say that far from reinforcing simplistic ideas of orphans as passive victims or resilient superheroes, or orphanages as grim prisons, and so on, young people's narratives of care hold space for a range of experiences, including anger, sadness, shame, strength, and joy. That it's not just all about negative experiences. Participants in their survey perceive the orphanage as a site of control, no question. However, they say it intensified as it grew in size, and yet the young people that they interviewed were not passive objects of care who submissively internalized institutional rules and regulations. So once again, this is coming out in the critical geographies literature of children not as being passive recipients of this kind of care and without agency, but in fact was quite the opposite, that children did have agency. Children were able to moderate their experiences in this regard. Then others have written about orphanage tourism from an international development perspective, right? Developing a taxonomy for international volunteering is something that these scholars have done. And importantly, what they say is that the public debate has a catalyzing effect on the informalization trend in the field. Some of the tourism-oriented providers stopped offering international volunteering with children under the influence of public campaigns and societal critique. Most of the non-specialized development-oriented providers felt that they had not been addressed or triggered by the debate and continued their business as usual. So while those who were clearly in orphanage tourism and the tourism industry pulled back from the practice, others in international development and international volunteering who didn't necessarily see themselves as tourism were continuing with business as usual. So once again, we've looked at this through these authors have looked at it through an international development lens, as opposed to others who looked at this through a legal lens and through a critical geographies lens. So my second point, apart from focusing on increasing the multidisciplinary entanglements with the topic, the other one was case studies predominate. And it's unavoidable that a topic like this is not without a predominance of case studies, right? But we know that case studies to some degree have a limited application in the understanding and knowledge that comes from it. How do we deal with that? Esther Bott's recent book is a particularly important book in the conversation around orphanage tourism, and her earlier article in Annals of Tourism Research also paved the way for the book. You know, this idea of a rescue industry is an indeed timely theoretical and practical framing of the practice of orphanage tourism. Amira Ben Ali and others who also wrote a chapter in the book I referred to earlier, but also in a marketing journal, talked about this as orphanages as a consumption object, which is a particularly important framing. And Ponaks and others as well have focused on Nepal largely for their perspectives on institutional tourism, talking about displacement, but also talking about trafficking and protection as well, the rescue industry, as Esther Bott suggests. So what are the research implications of this, and what does this all mean? Given that I'm running out of time, I'll try and do this very quickly. Some of the questions that come up is, okay, while there's a slowly growing interest in orphanage tourism as a topic of inquiry, what about theory? How do we move beyond the case studies and the descriptive data that is collected? How do we shape theory around the topic of orphanage tourism is particularly overdue? What about practice-based literature? What is very interesting, if you look at a lot of academic literature, they don't take any notice of what NGOs and governments and community groups have put out about orphanage tourism. And I think one of the things that we need to do in the investigation of orphanage tourism is give good attention to practice-based literature. These are the people who are on the ground doing this work, right? They may be totally descriptive, but it's important for us as scholars who sit back and analyze this to also take attention of the academic as well as the practice-based literature. Now the question, what are the wider implications of case-based studies? And this is a question of the limitations of case studies generally. How do we move beyond a simple case study? And what lessons do we draw more broadly? For example, what lessons can we draw from orphanage tourism research in Cambodia and Nepal? And how does this apply in other global South settings, such as on the African continent, or in Latin America, or in the Pacific Islands? How do we move beyond case studies? Also, how do we ensure that that the findings we are using and the observations we are using to help shape theory and practice are based around actual field-based studies with the researchers immersed in the field rather than desk-based analysis? What you will see in the orphanage tourism literature is quite a number of desk-based analysis. Now, the question is, how much does a reliance only on looking at literature and desk-based analysis really tells us about orphanage tourism? So this question of improving and enhancing field-based engagements versus desk-based analysis is something that is definitely a pressing issue of concern. And most importantly, how do we amplify voices from the Global South? As I said, for the most part, and probably predominantly, largely predominantly, orphanage tourism takes place in the Global South, again with the link to poverty. How do we then amplify voices from the Global South? If you look at a lot of the literature is written by scholars based in Western countries. By that I mean in Europe, in Australia, in North America, right? Talking about the implications of orphanage tourism in the Global South. Very rarely do we see researchers from the Global South emerge being able to tell these stories about their own people and their own countries. And this is, I think, is a major bone of contention when it comes to this kind of research. As Kathy Carpenter said, these kinds of, as external researchers, we rely on these social constructions of children, but also of orphanage tourism. To what extent are we taking into account the local perspectives on the phenomenon itself? And a further question, are links between research and practice common? And this is particularly important for a topic like orphanage tourism. Orphanage tourism isn't a theoretical indulgence. Orphanage tourism is a practical occurring challenge, and therefore its link to research and practice must be given some attention. As I said earlier, much academic research places very little emphasis on the practice-based research and observations, if you like. And I think until we can bridge this gap between research and practice when it comes to orphanage tourism, I think we are still some way to go to developing a solid core body of work on the topic. So some closing remarks. In closing, I wanted to draw from the closing chapter to the book that colleagues and I published in 2017, quotes from Stephen Uchembe, the founder of the Kenya Society of Care Leavers and someone who was an orphan himself. He said this: should the voluntourism industry be regulated? This goes without saying. It is clearly evident that the proliferation and survival of orphanages, although not entirely, can be attributed to the funding or resources that come from voluntourism. Many volunturists unknowingly allured by unscrupulous owners to expand orphanages through construction, land purchases, and through sponsorships and requests to cover the operating costs of orphanages. Unless this vicious cycle is interrupted, future generations of children will be deprived of the opportunities to optimize their life outcomes. And this was Stephen Uchembe, the founder of the Kenya Society of Care Leavers. So where does this leave the conversation on orphanage tourism, and what are the research implications? As I said earlier, the need for multidisciplinary approaches to understanding orphanage tourism is long overdue. It's quite apparent that when we look at much of the early literature, looking at it as a type of tourism is problematic, rather than looking at it through, say, a legal lens or a critical geographies lens or a psychology lens or an international development lens is particularly important in trying to understand and unpack the orphanage tourism phenomenon. And the other thing is, how do we move beyond case study research in orphanage tourism? It's understandable that we do case study research in orphanage tourism, but how do we build theory around this phenomenon so that we can elevate its intellectual merits, as it were? And the last thing is, how can we move beyond desk studies of this phenomenon and rely more on in-field studies, particularly in-field studies by people who are based in the Global South by people who are from the Global South, and like Stephen Uchembe in this case, who is a former orphan himself, and then someone who's gone on to create an organization to help monitor and shape orphanage best practice in Kenya. So with that said, I thank you, Rodney, for the invitation to speak at this. I'm sorry I was not able to be there today, and I look forward to joining you all in advancing the research on orphanage tourism in time to come. Thank you very much. And if you'd like to contact me for anything, my details are on the first slide. Thank you and have a good conference. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Professor Dr. Joseph Scheer. I think your presentation was very, very insightful and very eye-opening into the issue of doing research on orphanage tourism. And indeed, question says, where is the power? A question that I, with the field of cultural studies, have been looking at within orphanages, that multidisciplinary research, excuse me, and indeed that case study-based research. How are the findings of one case applicable to another case? And how can we shape a theory behind this? And indeed, lots of discussions I had in January in Haikau, as well as the rights of the child. How do we research children? How do we ensure the ethical foundation of our research is right to actually work with children? So also, how constructions for what is good and bad are changed. I think that's a very interesting question, because we do see this shift of donors, of foundations that want to help orphanages, but also towards volunteers that are more critical on where they are going and what is the contribution they can give. But I think that builds a very nice bridge to our second speaker, which is Patricia Nieuwenhuizen. She's the coordinator of Better Care Network the Netherlands. And she will be speaking on the Thanks Not Thanks campaign, a campaign launched by, well, actually, let me give the word to you, and you can tell it yourself.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. I'm going to share my screen first. I'm waiting for my full screen. Oh, back. I hope you can see it now. I'm the coordinator of Better Care Network the Netherlands, and what I would like to present to you, tell a little bit about a Better Care Network, about orphanage volunteerism, like we know what's happening from the Netherlands, about our campaigns, about how we try to inform young people to do something that is really impact and is in the best interest of the child, and share the criteria for ethical volunteering that we shared. And I will also tell something about the impact of our campaigns, and also about how research helps us to have good campaigning and to see what is really helpful in supporting family-based care. So Better Care Network Netherlands is a network of 9 different NGOs from the Netherlands. They all work with vulnerable children, and in 2007 they decided that we work for vulnerable children, and we see all in our projects in the Global South things happening that is not helpful for having family-based care. So we see many volunteers coming and supporting orphanages, but we also see many, we call it private development initiatives, so that are small-scale foundations based in the Netherlands who build orphanages or who support orphanages. And out of research, we know that there are around 1,500 from the Netherlands who often send volunteers also to the Global South. And all these organizations try to implement the UN guidelines on the alternative care of children. So family preservation, family strengthening, helping children that fall out of their family, come on the streets or in prostitution or in other abusive situations, help them going back to their family, extended family, or foster families if it's not possible in their own biological family. So they decided to work together and to establish this network. And we work with several groups. So we work with travel organizations, we work with schools because they provide internships sometimes in orphanages. We work with the Dutch government, especially to see if we can prevent that child sexual abuse is taking place by Dutch people in orphanages in the Global South. And the main group is that small-scale development initiatives who often work with best interests, with best ideas, with good intentions, but it's not in the best interest of the children. Professor Scheer already told, but we see as orphanage volunteering in orphanage, but also internships in orphanages. We see that still happening. Visits to an orphanage during travels, maybe that's not planned, but people come somewhere and think, okay, I'm going to visit there. Or sometimes a dance show or other performances are there and they are invited to visit it. And important for us is the terminology, because we know that the term orphanages is not has a negative connotation nowadays. So many organizations also tell this is a children's home, this is a shelter, this is a boarding school, and they tell volunteers who are in general already quite critical. They say, oh, but this is a good children's home. If this is not there, children will land up the streets, or these children do have a handicap, so they really have to have the care because they cannot have it at home. But often that's not the truth. And we see that also we guide together also with Rodney, these organizations to make an analysis, for example, the children who are in the orphanages, and if there is a possibility, reintegrate them. And at least for 80%, it's quite easy with small financial support, small guidance, with some family strengthening programs to help these children return to homes. We started in 2017 with our first campaign for young people. So we do that as soon as we have money. So in 2017, 18, 21, and last December, January, we have our campaigns, and we inform young people through social media about the negative impact of orphanage volunteering, despite all good intentions, the will to do something good, to raise the awareness and to make people critical about if you want to do something for vulnerable children, really be critical about how you do that. So our first campaign was Stop Orphanage Volunteering. And then we found out that there was a lot of media attention, a lot of people were informed, but we didn't really see effects on the Christian organizations who really have the good intention as we are on a mission, we're doing something for vulnerable children. So then we started it. It's quite negative, Stop Orphanage Volunteering. So we stopped. We started a campaign also, Be Wise, and in Dutch it's Wees Wijs, and that B is also the name for orphan. So it's kind of orphan wise slogan. In between, we did a campaign especially for schools, so Stop Orphanage internships, working together with schools, and more schools are signing the pledge that it's not allowed anymore because we know the negative impact on the attachment of children. And I want to show something about our Thanks No Thanks campaign we did last December and January, because we know that most volunteers start with Christmas, thinking about what to do when I finish my study, in summer holidays, etc. So that's also the perfect time for us to do. So on their timeline on Instagram and Facebook, they see this this message, and we always spread the stories of people who were volunteer once and now regret that they were doing. We give them a lot of information about the negative impact it has, also out of scientific research. But most important for us is to share the story of caregivers themselves, because they know that how it worked for them, and as an adult they're looking back and see the impact of the negative influence of going of volunteers. So what we did, these are real stories, a lot of interviews, a lot of quotes of young people who grew up in an orphanage. Most of them were not orphan, and giving the message about how to what it did to them. So the first boy says, I'm sorry, it's in Dutch, I discourage all young people in the Netherlands to do volunteering in orphanages. Or young people who told, I felt like I was living in a zoo with all the different visitors. If you leave, I feel lost, and I'm not an orphan. I'm there, for example, to raise money for the owner of the orphanage. So Thanks No Thanks means thank you for your volunteering, but no thanks, not in an orphanage, and we give them alternatives. So on our timeline, they can swipe and they say, heart, you want to follow your heart? Thanks. In an orphanage? No thanks, because I feel lost if a volunteer leaves me. Say no against volunteerism in an orphanage, and go to Thanks No Thanks to know more about that. So that's the story timeline. But of course, young people want to do something good. And it's quite difficult to say what is ethical volunteering. We cannot say, or we cannot check this is a really good place, if this is a good organization to go through. And especially because we know out of research, it's done by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, about these small-scale initiatives who send people and groups, for example, in summer holidays. So we made a list of criteria for ethical volunteering. So never in an orphanage, because of the attachment problems children have. And by coming and going, and we share stories of young people who are seeing hundreds of volunteers in the years they are staying in an orphanage. It's not good for them. Maybe at that moment they like it and they say, oh, we had a nice time and they were kind to us. But in the long end, they don't trust people anymore. They say, everybody who I love, they're leaving again. I don't know how to build up relationships because of this coming of going of all these maybe international volunteers. So this checklist, we ask people to look at it, and if they know this is placement, they can always email us and to ask for advice, for example. We think it's very important that the travel organization, that can be very informal, but can also be a formal travel agency, that they have attention on the attachment of children to their caregivers. So it's very important that you work with children who have a safe family environment. They are going back at the end of the day, for example, to have to be with their family, and not children who experience a trauma also for living in, for example, a project for street children, or a shelter, or a children's home. It's important to ask your organization, is this really aligned with the interests and the need of the beneficiaries, or is it made to have to bring these volunteers a good experience? Do projects have a lasting and sustainable impact? For example, sometimes young people are offered, are you going to give tooth brushing lessons to children because that's good? Is this really a lasting and sustainable impact? Is there somebody really needed to come from abroad to do this kind of lessons? Very important for us is that your placement is based on knowledge and experience. So we always say, what you are not allowed to do in the Netherlands, don't do that abroad. So if you work in the children's care, you need to have an education, you need to have a certificate of good conduct, you do need to have experience. Children in the global south are not less or need less qualifications, so be critical on that. Look at the financial transparency of the organizations, and many organizations in the Netherlands are now quite clear. This is the amount of money you pay for our help or our support. This is the money that goes to the NGO, the local NGO, etc. Very important is the child safeguarding policy. We also give trainings to organizations to set up that, because the safety of the children must be first priority. There must be a complaints procedure, a good pre-departure training. You know what to expect, what to do, what difficult situations you can see, and good guidance on the spot. Because young people, it's quite impressive, such an experience. And it's good that somebody is there to help you, and also to help you with, maybe you still have a kind of a white savior view on what you're going to do. Somebody who can talk with you and to explain why things go like they're going, and to help you with all the difficult things you see. So actually, it's quite difficult to say what is then a good alternative. So we tell young people, think about local volunteering or online volunteering, because you can have good guidance. There are so many NGOs in the Netherlands who really need your help. Of course, many of them still want to travel, want to go abroad. Then we say, when you travel to learn, the learning service idea is a good idea. Not having the idea, I'm going to help there, because who's waiting for you to come to help? Help with research, or learn a language, live with the host family to have a good view of the culture. Work on nature conservation, and if you have the qualifications and the experiences, you can work as an expert. And always to ask yourself the questions, am I allowed to do this in the Netherlands? Because, for example, if you can help children with homework, and you have you speak the language, you know how to handle with children, you have experience with children, maybe that's a good idea. But what if you go, because it can also be that local people do not have work because so many volunteers are coming there. This is I think my time is over. So I think I leave it with here. Thank you very much for your attention, and I don't know if there are any questions.
Thank you so much. Yeah, great to see how research is guiding your campaign. And I think as well, it's a very nice example of the SDG number 17, where we of course focus on the partnership for the goals, and I think that cooperation to really make a change, that is very important. I'm seeing a message, excuse me, I'm seeing a message that There is no questions in the chat so far, which is no problem. We also do a Q&A session at the end of the session. Then thank you very much for your presentation. And I'm going to introduce the next speaker. So our next speaker is Manika Santi. She is the program manager of Besselaka Foundation. Manika, time is yours.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rodney, and thank you so much for Atlas for having me. I am Manika Santi as the program manager of Yayasan Westelak Netherlands Indonesia. And let me share my screen first. Okay. Okay. Okay, so for today's presentation is focusing on the Indonesian national standard for child welfare and the work of Westelak Foundation in the orphanages. So for the first thing is, what is Westelak Foundation? This foundation is a non-profit organization based in Bali, Indonesia. We focus on protecting children by promoting family-based care and preventing orphanage tourism and child exploitation. We are focusing in this Permenses number 30 HUK 2011 on the national standards for child care in the child welfare institution, or LKSA, Lembaga Kesejahteraan Sosial Anak, which prioritize family-based solution over institutional care. So we follow the regulation by this national standard. We implement this national standard and want to spread the news about family-based care to the institutional care. We want that every child in these orphanages that came to orphanages due to poverty and access to education reasons can back to reunify to their families, and we empower them. So what we do in the orphanages is, the first one is we advocating for family reunification, as I said before, and the institutionalization. We want the children that still have parents, both parents or only the mothers, only the fathers, or maybe the extended families can be reunified to their families because they are all needs their family. They are should be in their families. And the second is we supporting vulnerable families through empowerment programs. We want to prevent these families to put their children to these orphanages. And we want the children that have been reunified to the families not being institutionalized again after being reunified. We want the families can support the children by their own work. We support staff so they can work to increase their income. So the next is we educating stakeholders on child protection laws and best practices. These stakeholders means we work closer to the orphanages stakeholders, to the managers or the owner of orphanages, because somehow we found out that not all orphanages knows the regulation of the national standards or even the reunification programs. So we socialize about this, and we really support them if they willing to move from this institutionalized based care to family-based care. And the last one, we actively campaigning online about best practices, and also we share discussion cases that happens in the orphanages, because some cases happen in orphanages and most of people doesn't even know about this case, even though the cases is very, very dangerous to the children. Most of people doesn't even know about this in Indonesia, of course. So we want to spread the awareness about orphanages to worldwide, to Indonesian to be specific. Next is, what is the Indonesian national standards for child welfare? So we focus on the Permensas Social Ministry Regulation number 30, 2011. This regulation is established national standards for child welfare institution, emphasizing that institutional care should only be a last resort after all family-based care options have been exhausted. So there's some option for children that on orphans or children that have no parents, have no families. There are some options before they are in an orphanages. So in the core principle of this national standard is the first one, family-based care. There are kinship care, foster care, and also adoption that I will explain it later, is prioritized before the orphanages. And the second principle is LKSA, or child welfare institution, should only be a last resort and limit to 18 months. So if after 18 months they have to recycle to try again the family-based care, the children should not living more than 8 months in the orphanages. And the third one is the government licensing and monitoring are mandatory for all LKSAs. Yeah, because this this licensing is really important. By this licensing, the social services and also social ministry could do a monthly monthly monitor to the orphanage. Without this license, the orphanage can't operate without unchecked, and what happened in the orphanage no one will know, no government will know, and this can higher the risk of abuse in orphanage. And the last one is children should not enter orphanages due to poverty or lack of education access. Yes, this happened a lot in Indonesia, that in research and also while we do the socialization to orphanages, we found out that the reason the children came to these orphanages because of poverty of the families, even though they have parents. The reason is poverty and also to have a good access to education. But it's totally wrong. It's already written in the national standard that it's not allowed. And the challenges is, as I said before, many orphanages in Indonesia still operate outside this regulation. They not follow the laws as what written in this national standard, and also lacking government licensing and oversight. Yeah, because of the most of the orphanages doesn't have the license. They doesn't get the monthly check or even the annually checked. And then what is the proper childcare order in Permensos? So in the proper childcare order is the first one. If we found out that one child is orphans, or they got impacted by a disaster, or they are got abused in their families, we can do this family-based care first. That's written in the article number 6 and 8. The first one is kinship care. It's we have to find the extended families. After all, they must know about their extended families and familiar with their extended families. So the first thing that we should get is their extended families. And of course, before putting the children with the extended families, we have to do this assessment first to make sure that they are safe with these extended families and they can live normally, they can live happily with this, and the extended family can support the child. And the next one is the foster care. It's really familiar, very common in another country, but unfortunately in Indonesia, it's not really common yet, especially in Bali for the foster care. But this care is temporary care under the government supervision. So it's basically the children live with the extended families or the parents, but the children got supported by another families, because the extended families can fully support the living of the children or the school expenses of the child. So yeah, it's allowed to have another parents to support the children. And the next one is adoption, which is very familiar in Indonesia. This is a permanent placement in a loving home, to a new loving home for the children. It's common, but unfortunately in Bali itself, only 2 orphanages that has permission, has a license to do this care, to do this adoption process, which in Indonesia, in Bali, there are a lot of orphanages. There are many children that live in the orphanages, but only 2 orphanages that is allowed to do this process. And the second option is institutional care, which is the last resort with that written in the article number 10 that LKSA should only be temporary for 18 months maximum before reassessment, before doing again the family-based care first. So yeah, institutional care is only the last resort for the child that is orphans or yeah something. And the third proper childcare order is mandatory licensing and monitoring that written in the article number 24 that all LKSAs must be registered to ensure government oversight. Yeah. If one orphanage doesn't have the license, it could higher the risk of abuse, and without any supervise, this can come again and again, happen again and again, and no one would know about this. No one would notice about this, and the government even cannot do anything because they don't know that this orphanage exists or operate. And that's why the licensing is really, really important. Annual and monthly monitoring based on the license. So it's really important for an orphanage to have a license. The fourth or the last proper childcare order is poverty is not a reason to place a child in an orphanage, because if the families face poverty or lack of financial trouble or something, then why don't we help the families to increase their income? Why don't we support the families to increase their income so the children should not be superior to their loving families? That's how it works. And the reality that happens in Indonesia, to be specific, is many orphanages operate illegally, avoiding government oversight, and weak enforcements allow child exploitation and abuse to continue unchecked, and crimes often go undetected until victims manage to report them. And that's what commonly happened lately in Indonesia. Next is why institutional care fails and regulatory violence in LKSAs. So research shows that children that lives in orphanages got higher risks of abuse, developmental delays, and emotional trauma. As we know that parents and families plays a higher part to build the mental of a child, because how we train our child is different in parents living, in families living, than in the orphanage. And also in families care, the character of the children will so much better. It's grow better rather than in the orphanage, because in the orphanage we can sure that the caregiver could give 100% of care to one children, because they have a lot of children in the orphanage. So it's different, like this different in the family-based care that only have 3 or 5 children. They can really focus on the growth of the mental and also the character of the children. And also it could affect the long-term well-being of these children. And the case studies in Indonesia, there are, the first one is Jodi Osha House. This is one of the biggest orphanages in Bali that have been closed in 2020 to 2022, where we found out that 98% of the children had parents, not only the mothers, not only the fathers, but most of them still have both parents, but being institutionalized due to poverty and access to education. That's why most of the children came from East Nusa Tenggara, from Sumba Timur, East Sumba. That's the research that we found out. And due to this close of these orphanages, we reunified all the children, and also we support the families after this reunification, and I will explain about this later. And the other cases that we found out is the orphanage tourism. As what Patricia has mentioned before, the orphanage used the children to gain more money by attracting the foreigner. As we know, Bali has a lot of tourists. The tourists in Bali not only for the destination but also for the orphanage. So the orphanage gain more money by attract this tourist, and also let the children in the orphanage to perform to make the volunteers or the donors or the sponsors happy, interested, and attracted. So they want to give more money. Donors more money came over and over again. Every time they came to Bali, they would came to the orphanages because they felt happy. So the orphanage used this moment to solve the sad story of the children. That's the sad news, because this brought a dependency for the children to rely on the volunteers' money. And another case that happened lately, very, very new in Indonesia, is abuse. The case came from one of the orphanages in Surabaya. It happened on January 2025, so it's really new that one unlicensed orphanage owner sexually abused 3 children for 3 years. This happened over years, and the unlicensed orphanage being unknown by the government, this news explode after one of the children can escape from the orphanage and report it to the police. So it's being investigated after the report from the victims. If the victims doesn't came out and report it, we would never know that this case happened, that there are predators in these orphanages. And another case also happened in Tangerang several months ago in 2024, that 7 children abused by the orphanage staff for several years. That the number of the victims is 18 children, and 9 of the children still has parents, so they now being reunified to their parents. So 9 again being under the social services. So from this case, we know that that half from the children, or most of the children that in that orphanages still have parents. Okay, so the other cases is exploitation continues due to oversight. For this exploitation, we can see it now in social media that a lot of orphanages sold a sad story about the children that live in their orphanages. They gain money by selling the sad story and also sell the face of the children, which is ethically wrong, because we might never know what will happen in the future after they spread the face of the children, the sad story about the children, because they're still young. We won't know what will happen in the future after they grow up older. So yeah, that's the cases the cases that happens in Indonesia. Some cases that explode, unfortunately, there might be more that never been exploited. And then what West Lycan Foundation efforts do to keep children with families? Of course, we do something to prevent this happen, to try to fix this. The first one is we do reunification program. We collaborate with the orphanage that understand and open-minded to reunification the children that still have parents, that have an ability to be living with their families, by reunify them. But after reunify them, we should solve the problem of the families. If the reason of the children being institutionalized is poverty and lack of education, and the option that we could give is the family empowerment. So we empower the families by giving them stuff to increase their money, to start a small business, to upgrade their skills, and also providing the kids with education. We provide the school expenses and also educational needs to make sure that the families can saving more for the first 6 months. We want to make sure that the children can live with their loving families, but also can get good access of education, and also the parents can improve their income so they can provide their own child. And why this works matters because many children are in orphanages due to poverty, not because they are orphans. So why we are not solving the problems of the poverty instead of solving the problems by putting the children to the orphanages. That's why we are strengthening the families to prevent unnecessary separation and secures a better future for children. We are not only support the families that have been reunified to the children, but we also help the vulnerable families to prevent them to put their children to the orphanages. We want to reduce the number of children in orphanages. That's what we do. And also, we support the families with the empowerment garden and financial management training. The empowerment garden is basically we provide them with the nutritious vegetables to support their needs of nutritious foods to reduce their expenses of food. And also we provide them with financial management training because basically most of the families that we empower doesn't even know how to manage their money, doesn't even know how to budgeting. So they just lack of money again and again. That's why this financial management training is very important for them. And it's worked great over these 2 years because we found out the number of income increasing by time. And yeah, we continue to do this training and also mentoring by our empowerment staff. And not only by the families, we also advocating for childcare reform in LKSS because we believe we cannot do this alone. We have to collaborate with LKSS itself to implement the national standard. So we're spreading awareness among orphanages in Bali, and we've come to 25 more orphanages in Bali, focusing in 4 big regency. It's Denpasar, Badung, Tabanan, and Gianyar. We came to educating about the national childcare standards, and also we encouraging complaints with reunification policies to return children to families. And most of the orphanages doesn't even know about the national childcare standards and reunification programs. So we are very open to collaborate with these orphanages to do the reunification. If they are willing to do the reunification, we are really open to help them. We are really open to encouraging them how to do the reunification and also how to do the empowerment program. And we also preventing child collection for donation, that we know many orphanages recruit children to attract foreign sponsors. So we are encouraging them how to fundraising without selling the sad story of the children, but by selling the programs that they are encouraging families. Why don't sell your programs about helping families, helping the children, not by selling the sad story of the children, by not selling the sad story of the children. And also we educating orphanage about the ethical child protections, because yeah, it can affect to the future of the children if they continue to use the sad story, the sad face of the children. And also we cannot work alone, not only the foundation and also LKSA, but we also collaboration with the stakeholders, the government. We always take permissions to the social services in Bali before going to one orphanages to another orphanages, because yeah, it's more easier for us to do these programs. And also we work hard with public awareness through social media, because yeah, campaigns to educate the public. We we surely understand that social media play a big impact in nowadays, and it's more modern, it's more easy to widespread the issue, the education, to raise the awareness about the child rights violation in orphanages, and also we sharing a real case of abuse and exploitation to expose unethical practices. We want public more people to know that these dangerous things, this abuse thing happened to our children in an orphanage. So we want them to realize that orphanage is not fully safe for them. Some cases happened, some bad moments happen in an orphanage. So we want them to be more open-minded. And social media is very powerful because like donors, not all the donors know the information that these orphanages has do an abusement, but by this campaign, we want to aware them that this orphanages has done something bad to a children, and they could aware to stop the donors, the donation or something. We want them to know about this. So that's what we work on through the social media, and it works really well to widespread the news to everyone. And yeah, for the conclusion, is the first one is institutional care must be replaced with sustainable family-based solution, because we believe that all children deserve to be in their loving families, not to be institutionalized with strangers, with strict regulation that doesn't match how they should grow in a real families, not to perform and make tourists interested, attract tourism or something. No, they should live with their loving families, and there are some option if they are found the children is orphans, there are kinship care or something, and something we can do that, and orphanages is the last option. The second one is Indonesia's law support this shift, but stronger enforcement is needed. Yeah, we need to support these laws, and also we need to spread this regulation more to the orphanages, to the public, that we have to follow this national standard. And also, yeah, we have the reunification program. Then why didn't we didn't do that? And the third one is the government, NGOs, and the public must collaborate to end the institutionalization. Yeah, our foundation cannot work alone, because this is a big thing to do. We have to work closely with the government and also the public and other NGOs to spread the news, and to make the public realize that not all orphanages in Indonesia especially is safe for the children. Some abuses happens, and the exploitation by the orphanage tourism is really happen, the dependency, but for the children is really huge impact, because because they can't fully work or living with their own food, because they rely on the donors or something. And yeah, we need your help about this. And the fourth one is the last one is the Stop Orphanages campaigns call for a global action against orphanage exploitation. Yeah, we want to spread the Stop Orphanages campaign worldwide, not only Indonesia, but of course specifically in Indonesia, because we know not all Indonesian agreed about this campaign. But yeah, nothing wrong to learn more about these orphanages things that happen in Indonesia, about the orphanage tourism, about the bad side of orphanages. So I think that's all about my presentation. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Mr. Rodney.
Thank you so much, Manika. I think it's really nice to see how research is leading the programs that you're doing. And I was myself doing that research up to 2020 as part of my PhD. And it's wonderful to see how the findings and recommendations have shaped the program that you, with a group of very enthusiastic people, are now implementing. And I think it's very important as well that a local group of people is implementing this, and not me as a foreigner that says this is wrong or this should have been done different. Or what Professor Chair also said is but where did we change the perception? So thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen back. See. Okay, perfect. There we go. Yeah. So before we go to the Q&A, if there are any questions, I think presentations have been very clear. So, but whoever has a question or an idea, please ask them in the chat. So when we're looking at engagement and collaboration opportunities, so I want to have a moment where we can talk about how can you contribute. And I think with the presentations of Patricia and Monica, we already saw many opportunities on how we as researchers can actually help foundations or initiatives to take that step further and be research-based on the implications or the campaigns they want to run. And I've, as I said, I've seen that myself firsthand with the foundation we have in Indonesia. But also, I think it was clear in the presentation of Patricia how research is guiding the campaigns. So when we're looking at the possibilities for engaging into this special interest group, there are actually 5 different points I want to make. So first of all, that's research and knowledge sharing. So conducting and publishing research on the impacts of orphanage tourism. And I think Professor Chair had quite a number of interesting examples from different approaches. So share case studies, data and insights on ethical alternatives. Also so important that we have data on case studies so we can make comparisons and see where correlations are. And to collaborate with fellow researchers to develop policy recommendations. So second point is to for advocacy and awareness raising. So we should promote evidence-based alternatives to orphanage tourism. So, for example, the 2 initiatives that we saw right now, Thanks No Thanks and Stop Orphanages. And we should engage with media and educational institutions to spread awareness, like what Patricia is doing with the pledge for schools to pledge that they will not send any students to orphanages anymore, but also to disseminate research findings into more easy to read for the general public research in the media, but also specific websites that are built for that. Then the policy and industry engagement, so working with policymakers to develop regulations against orphanage tourism, to encourage travel companies to adopt ethical tourism guidelines, and to engage with the tourism sector to promote responsible volunteering. Volunteering itself is not a bad thing, absolutely not. But we should not encourage people to volunteer in orphanage. So then, when we look at community and stakeholder collaboration, so we can connect with child protection organizations to support family-based care. And actually, when we look back at the national standard that Monica presented, it's based on a research that had been done after the tsunami in Aceh, one of Indonesia's provinces, the Christmas Boxing Day tsunami, where a lot of children went missing or were taken to orphanages in Jakarta while their parents were actually still alive. And then the government, seeing this issue, commissioned the research with UNICEF and Save the Children to see what actually the practice in the field was and how this could be made better. So this is very important to connect with these child protection organizations because we can make the difference as an organization based on research. So partner with NGOs and governmental bodies to push for systematic change and help to facilitate transitions from institutional care to community-based support. And I think that's also something that was very visible in Monica's presentation, how that shift can be made. So when we're looking at the participation in the special interest group activities, we hope that everybody, whether you're a researcher, a practitioner, work at an NGO, or just you are interested in the topic, join. I'm planning on doing more webinars, workshops, conferences, whatever you think is a good idea, please let me know, because I'm more than willing to facilitate and to engage with everyone to see how we can make this a success. So join working groups focused on these specific issues with orphanage tourism and provide mentorship and guidance for new researchers in this field. So, do we have any questions? Quickly see what the chat. Still, no, we don't have any questions at the moment. That means, Patricia, Monica, you were very, very clear. And also the presentation from Joseph was very clear. Also, this webinar is recorded, so it might be, especially for example, for people from America that will watch this later. If you have any questions based on this webinar, just reach out to me, rodney.westerlaken@nhlstemmen.com, and I'm more than happy to follow up on these questions with either presenters or myself. It then brings us, I think, to the last slide. Here we go. So thank you very much for joining this webinar. Connect with us to continue the discussion. Please sign up for the special interest group. And there's a link there. But also, if you simply Google Atlas SIG, Special Interest Group, Orphanage Tourism, you'll find a link there to sign up for the special interest group. Follow up on opportunities in SIG involvement. Soon we will evaluate this webinar, and we will announce new webinars or other initiatives that will come up. And there you see my email address once more. So if you have any questions, if you're watching this later, please let me know. More than happy to reach out to help you with your question. And this brings us to the end of the webinar. Thank you all so much. Thank you, presenters, Professor Chair, Patricia, Monica. Thank you so much. Leontine, thank you so much for organizing.